That's a bit of a different backdrop, isn't it? He's on the way home right now from my road trip. I'm thinking about starting a GoFundMe. Buy a helicopter. I'm so sick of driving. Man, I put on the miles in a year, I'll tell you what, in a week. There's only, I don't know, an hour and a bit light left. If I time it right, by the time I get up in the mountains again, I might be able to spot a grizzly bear on the way home in a slide and videotape and show them to everybody. In the meantime, what do we got? Finger on the trigger. Okay, whatever that's going to mean. Hi Steve, resending a story on my time. You're probably lost in your email blizzard. This is my first close-up encounter. I was on the verge of accidentally harvesting my first Sasquatch, so here it is. I hope it supplies at least one of the missing pieces and maybe reinforces the hunting ethic. Be absolutely certain before you shoot. Jim Barkley. Steve, I'm enjoying it. Your here it is, take it or leave it attitude on the Sasquatch topic. I'm right there with you on your wish to not see another one. After a number of run-ins of grizzlies, cougars, and Sasquatch, I too would rather never again run into any of them. I just don't feel the need. My name is Jim Barkley. Use my name if you want. I'm 68 years old. And for 63 years, I fished and hunted big game in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and BC. Those trips are what I live for, and the wild game in the freezer. I've had several encounters with Sasquatch over the years, including visuals, intimidations, stick structures, gifts such as a cougar skull, and other strange experiences. As stated before, I've kept a record of my past hunting and fishing trips since 1966, and always tried to add comments on anything unusual of interest or interesting. It's enabled me to provide exact dates and places of past encounters, so enough BS. For my hunting records, the date was October 9th, 1971. I was 19 at the time. Dad and I were moose hunting in the Waiparas Creek area of northwest Calgary. We stayed in a tent trailer overnight, and early the next morning, we climbed the north end of a ridge we knew well, and then dropped partway down the east side onto a bench and began hunting to the south. After about a half a mile, we stopped and we heard steady crunching in the 7 or 8 inches of bone-dry yellow poplar leaves on the hillside below. We were still on the bench just below the bridge top, and the crunching was directly below and coming straight up at us from the east. We were sure it was a moose, but reflecting back now, these were clearly individual footsteps with about a second and a half between each one. Reflecting back, it definitely sounded bipedal. So we sat down about 25 feet apart on a low slope with rifles ready. Whatever this was coming uphill at a steady pace with only a couple of breaks of 9 or 10 seconds each. When the noisemaker finally partially crested the rim of the bench at about 35 yards, I could see a tall, dark figure from about the knees up, slightly obscured by a very thin leafless brush. The rising sun was breaking over Salter Ridge behind and to the right side of the animal, so there was a slight glare in my scope. The animal was totally visible, otherwise, but fine detail was kind of vague. It had stopped at that point and was looking directly at us. I really expected to see a moose. My first impression, or hope, was a bull moose. The pale bluff-colored antler on the one side was bent down and forward, partially obscuring the face. I shot a bull with his exact antler deformation and also partially obscured the facial area. I now believe this is actually the light tan-colored flat face of the animal. At the time, knowing absolutely nothing about Sasquatch, I was still trying desperately to turn this thing into a moose. As I studied the animal with my 4-power scope, I could see there were other anomalies, things that were not quite right. I could not see the other antler, and the long muzzle was not there, and the brisket was very wide. This animal stood there motionless and focused on us. It seemed to sense we were there. Afterwards, I wished I had used my binoculars, but at 35 yards, I didn't think it would be necessary. I thought the scope would be all I needed. Anyway, after about 10 seconds of standing there, the animal spun 180 degrees and tore off downhill, sounding like a runaway D8. My confusion was compounded further when I failed to see the long, dark body of a moose during the spin around. It seemed to be a tall, dark, vertical animal that turned on an axis using 2 legs. Right afterwards, still confused over what I had seen, I made the mistake of saying to Dad, "I think it was a bull," when I should have said, "I think it was a moose." He did not see the animal, but berated me anyway for not shooting. But there was no way I could have shot, especially as I didn't have a tag for whatever the hell that was. I suppose there are some trigger-happy hunters out there who at this point who have just harvested their first Sasquatch. Good luck with that. Interestingly, I don't believe the animal got our scent or actually saw or heard us. It seemed to sense danger, assess the threat, and tear out of there. We had not moved or made any sound. I can add that the animal made no vocal and there was no bad smell. Now, I did have my Remington 7mm mag trained on it the whole time. Maybe picked up on that, triggering the panicked retreat. Reviewing this in my mind now, the animal is about 6 to 7 feet tall. Keep in mind I could only see it from the knees up, and it seemed to be hunched forward. It also appeared that the brisket was quite wide for a moose. Yeah, now I see it. It was bent over looking at me like I was a tackling dummy. Steve, it was one of your YouTube presentations about how a moose standing end on in less than decent light can appear to be a tall, dark, two-legged animal. That prompted me to send this story to you. Basically, you're expecting to see the long horizontal body of a moose, not a vertical profile. Again, in this case, I did not see the horizontal body during the turnaround. It's only in the last 10 or so years through the internet that I've come to put a name to some of my unexplainable encounters in the past. And so the vision of this creature standing on the berm of the bench remains vivid in my memory bank after 50 years, and I suspect it always will. Recently have found other sighting reported for Wayparis Creek on the Alberta Saskatchewan, on the Alberta Sasquatch website. So do what you want with this report. At least I got to tell it to someone who was willing to give me the benefit of the doubt and actually listen. So thanks, Steve. Keep sharing. Knowledge is our best defense. Yes, it is. Shared knowledge amongst the people is the number one best defense against basically anything. Well, thanks for sharing that again, man. I'm looking forward to hearing more of those, more of your diaries for sure. You got my interest, curiosity, big time. Strange happenings. All right, let me mark this as red so I don't double up. I think I might have doubled up on a couple, but at least it's free and painless, right? Hi, Steve. My name is Jim Branham. I live in southeastern Illinois. I'm not sure if this ties into the mind speak parts of the emails you read, but here it goes. I have a couple things happen that make me question what really happened. I've always been an outdoor type fellow, and my friends have said I've got a Grizzly Adams vibe about me. When I was still a young man, I used to hunt and fish a lot. And then I moved to the East Coast, where most of the game land was private property. That sure is sad to see, man. I've seen so much private property in the U.S. compared to public land. It's kind of heartbreaking in a lot of areas. I feel bad for the people that can't afford those clubs, you know? It's kind of not fair. No hunting or fishing, and public land for hunting was taking a chance with your life, as it seemed every year someone was getting mistaken for wildlife and getting shot. I eventually learned the best part of the outdoor activities I enjoyed was just being out there, enjoying nature. I did a lot of camping and kayaking and had next to nothing to fear from the dark woods aside from the black bear population and maybe a few big cats. In an odd sort of way, the nighttime is a special attraction for me. The dark, cold, lonely places are strangely soothing to me. When I moved back home to the Midwest, I spent many nights walking around the 5-acre parcel of land we own. There's mostly farmland around here, connected by patches of woods here and there, and not too far from Beale Woods State Park, one of the last patches of old-growth forest remaining in Illinois. It runs alongside the Wabash River. One night on our property, I was relaxing, nearly dozing, in a nice comfy recliner chair, when all of a sudden I felt a presence, or multiple presences, rushed towards me in what felt like an attack upon myself. I was jolted to full awareness and had sprung to my feet before I even knew what was happening. I was instantly in a sort of a battle mode. This was not one of those, as you drift to sleep, you feel like you're falling out of bed or something and jerk yourself awake. It was a hair standing on end, battle coming at you from all sides, attack. But there's nothing there, nothing at all. Now there's an old family cemetery plot about a quarter mile away with a dozen or so graves, and my mother insists she sees and hears ghosts in the big farmhouse on this property that we live on, including some lingering ghostly smells. And if you ask her, she will tell you about the night a UFO frightened her with flashing lights at the rooftop level, and believe me, she gets upset if you scoff at the idea that such a thing could happen. From my experience that night, relaxing in the recliner chair, I concluded that I must have had a strong reaction to some sort of animal disturbance my conscious mind did not pick up on. I mean, really. I heard nothing, saw nothing, smelled nothing. I only felt it, and it came from nowhere, everywhere. It did put me on alert for a good while. I have to admit, That much for sure. It was bizarre. My second experience left me a bit shaken as well, but it was dealing with coyotes. There are coyotes around here for sure, and they do make quite the racket when they really get going on their calls. Well, one night I was out walking around in the past midnight dark on a seemingly peaceful, still night with just enough moonlight so you could see where you're going, but not enough light for you to see clearly, even after your eyes adjust to the low light level. All of a sudden, without even a hint that a pack of coyotes were on the prowl, they let loose with every sound I've ever heard a coyote make, and then some noise on top of that. It was deafening, completely surrounded me. It was incredible, the volume that they produced. It was so loud. It actually felt like they were inside my head because there was no real discernible sense of direction it was coming from. I have to admit, there was a moment of panic, and I thought I was going to be attacked by 100 coyotes. What could I do? I let out a primal roar and braced myself for what was sure was a full-out coyote attack, and then nothing. No sound of them attacking, no sound of them retreating, no sounds, period, except for my heart pounding and my heavy breathing. After standing there absolutely still for about 5 minutes and hearing absolutely nothing, I got the hell out of there and hurried inside, completely confused about what the hell just happened. I've heard all kinds of animals that night, but this took the cake. I'd like to say a bunch of coyotes freaked me out that night, but they were so loud, like they were right inside my head. I've seen many shadow moving at night around here before, but I process them just as figments of my overactive imagination. It's just lately I've been wondering what the hell. I still like to meander about in the dark night and not much else happen. What do you think about these incidents? I'm just a knucklehead letting my imagination get the best, or is some weird shit going on around here? Thank you, Jim Branham. Okay, Jim, first off, thanks for sending that in, man. I know it takes time. And what do I think about that? Well, I can assure you, there isn't one predator alive in the forest that makes a shit pile of racket before it attacks. They don't do that, ever. Natural predators, when they want to attack you, they do it stealthily, silently, and you don't hear anything until the teeth are ripping into you, and that's just the way it is. So, and another thing is too, like I've said to everybody else, if you actually feel you got to go out of your way to Google get online and Google or YouTube search something like this, and you come up with my channel, and then you feel compelled to find my email address and share it with the world through me, you already know what it was, man, right? You already know what it was, and you were there, you heard it, you felt it, you experienced it, and you shared it, thankfully. Okay, here we go. Alabama encounter, one of my favorite states. Hi, Steve. My event happened in 1990. I'm 50 years old now and lived with this for almost 30 years. First off, we'll start with a little background. I lived and was born in central Alabama, with hundreds of acres behind my rural home. I started hunting birds and really whatever I could at the age of 5 and became a deadly hunter. Started with BB guns and moved up with age. Anyway, I'd leave every day when not in school and head out with a gun, hatchet, and an old aluminum army canteen. I'd walk maybe a couple miles way back in the woods and stay all day till darkness, and supper made me come home. Sometimes I had cousins or a friend with me, but not always. Now, I said all that to give the reader an idea of my experiences alone in the woods and my perception of my surroundings. Never afraid or scared of anything from snakes, coyotes, or cats. Years of outdoor adventures, I literally lived to hunt my entire life. Okay, about to get to the day I'll never forget. This happened right at 30 years ago now. This will be long and very detailed, so you and the listeners can put yourselves in my shoes for a moment. I just graduated high school. My best friend and I decided to go on a deer hunt at his dad's hunting club in Flatwood, Alabama. It was really not considered a town back then, but more of a small sign on the side of the road. We went down to the hunting club and arrived there around lunch, looking at the pin-up board where everyone places a pin on a map for safety reasons, so everyone would know where everyone was hunting. It was December and the rut was almost in. We were after a monster whitetail buck. Looking at the map, we found some property across the highway and down a long dirt roadway away from everyone else. You could tell by the holes in the map from previous pens how often the area has been hunted. Our goal was to get as far away from all the traffic fellow hunters as possible. We hand-sketched a map on a sheet of notebook paper and away we went. We parked the truck after about a 20-minute ride from camp and unloaded the ATV, got all our gear together, drove down the small logging road, probably a mile or better, to the area we wanted to hunt. Our plan was to drop me off at a small green field along the edge of a creek, and my best friend was to travel to the end of the road, which is approximately 3/4 of a mile from me. By this time, it's 2 p.m., and it gets dark around 5-ish. He and I both usually hunt until we could not see through our rifle scopes any longer. So I get to my setup location. I've been there for approximately 30 minutes. I begin to hear what sounded like, at that time in my life, drunk Mexicans talking at the end of the field towards what was a swampy area. From the map, it had appeared to be a creek, but when we got there, it was a very swampy stretch. The talking I heard was between two individuals I could tell by the distance apart. As I listened, I reviewed the camp map in my mind and could not figure out how anyone could be in that location according to the map showing small roads and trails we had used the only way in. That was the first odd moment that day. As the day went on, the talking subsided and kind of left my mind as the sun began to sink. It was deer time. As most know, the deer start moving right at dark. About 45 minutes before dark, a large doe deer came out and began to feed. About 10 minutes later, a small buck comes out and begins feeding in her direction. As the two deer fed, going away from my direction, it became darker and darker, and all of a sudden both deer raised their heads and became very alert, and even spooked looking. I thought I was busted. Maybe the deer had smelled me. As I watched them, they were looking towards the swamp, exactly where the talking had come from. A few moments passed, and both deer busted in full run towards me. One deer passed me within feet to my right and the other to my left, so that let me know they were unaware of my presence. Looking back, I also noticed the deer did not stop running as far as I could hear them. Most hunters know deer will run so far and then stop and look back to see if it's being followed. These two run wide open, almost like a death run, out of my hearing. So anyway, darkness falls and I remain on the stand waiting on my friend on the ATV to come pick me up. It is not unusual for him to come out of his tree stand 15 to 20 minutes past dark. About 30-40 minutes go by, I decided to pack up all my stuff and walk out to the small logging road and wait for my ride to the truck. I get to the curve where he had dropped me off at, and I just wait. Back in those days, we rarely brought a flashlight, and I did not have one that day with me because woods and dark was not really an issue. As I stand there, I assume I've been there for about 20 minutes, and I start hearing large trees snapping and breaking roughly 200 to 250 yards away. My father was a logger, and we cut several trees, and I know what limbs and larger branches sound like when they are being broken. These were very large limbs snapping, and what appeared to be small trees being pushed over and hitting the drier leaves and making lots of noise. This noise was deliberately coming closer and closer to me, heading my direction, and about 50 yards away I started yelling at it, not having any earthly idea what it was. As I've been yelling for a few minutes as loud as I could, it stops breaking limbs, and all I can hear was slow, bipedal footsteps that were loud and sounded heavy. There's also an occasional popping noise. This sounds like a large dog snapping at a bumblebee or fly. Is the only way I can explain it when they are laying around next to you on the porch. The steps begin slowing as I continued to curse the animal and yell and reaching down, throwing whatever I could pick up off the ground in the direction of the footsteps. The creature continued in my direction and stopped roughly 25 yards away from me. That's not good. At this point, I was still screaming out. I was kicking debris towards the sound and warning it that I would shoot. However, at that time, I had no intention to fire. Anyway, whatever it was stood there for roughly 15 to 20 minutes silently. I had almost begun to think somehow it had walked off without me knowing. Then it began to move. It walked parallel along the edge of the logging road about 25 yards and crossed a small pathway. I could tell by the difference in the footsteps when it crosses the road. And then it came down the side of the logging road in my direction and stopped directly across from where it had previously stopped, meaning I had turned 180 degrees. As I continued to yell and scream at it, telling it to leave and just go away, or I would be shooting soon, well, again there was 15 to 20 minutes of silence. Picture this, I was kicking leaves and pine straw or whatever was on the ground towards it. Pitch dark, December darkness, complete silence from whatever it was, and I did not smell anything unusual other than a typical murky smelling swamp. Again, as I had thought I was going nuts because I no longer heard anything, movement again. The thing followed its path right back up the side of the road and crossed exactly where it had previously. It came back down towards me and stopped at its first location when it stopped walking the first time. You can imagine by this point I'm done fooling with this thing. By now my voice is hoarse and I can barely yell anymore. After several warnings, I'm down on one knee pointing my rifle in the direction where I supposed it had stopped. After about 5 minutes, my patience had grown thin. I fired my .270 rifle and I knew what I expected to happen. After the noises I had heard previously with all the tree breaks, some sounded very large, maybe to 6 to 8 inch diameter trees. The fireball from the blast and the echoing seemed to last a minute. I expected the woods to be torn to pieces with something fleeing. Now this creature or animal, in all aspects, had virtually circled me and smelled me. Knowing most animals in the woods after smelling a human would flee, and especially at blank range on the receiving end of a .270 high-power rifle blast. But I was surprised and realized I was surrounded by complete silence again. Well, I sat there in the darkness, realizing I only had 3 more rounds left in the rifle, and thinking the bullets were all small as a pencil, that I'd better save my ammo for just in case. After a few minutes, which seemed like an eternity, literally probably 5 to 10 minutes, I heard movement, bipedal footsteps starting to walk away. I walked away, following the exact path it had taken on its approach. I cannot tell you the relief when I realized it was walking away and not towards me. As I listened to the footfalls until I could not hear any longer, and guessing maybe 100 more yards till I could tell it was out of hearing, no more tree breaks or any popping noises at all, just walking. I began trying to follow the pitch black logging road towards the truck. I finally made it to the truck, which had a toolbox in the bed, and that's where I placed my feet while I sit on the cab of the truck, wondering what had just transpired. And where is my friend, and why was he so late? Again, after what seemed like an eternity to hear the ATV coming, he pulls up, loads up on the trailer, and I help him tie it down. Come to find out, the ATV had broken down, and my friend was soaking wet from sweat trying to start the ATV, and finally got it to start running. We never spoke of the things that happened to me that afternoon. Later on the way home, he did ask me if I heard a shot way after dark, probably 2 hours after dark. I just looked at him like I don't know what he was talking about. Back then, you did not want to be the guy that shot at something that was unidentifiable, or tell the story and face the ridicule. A Bigfoot or Sasquatch never really crossed my mind. Roughly 20 years later, I had dial-up internet and happened to see something on TV and did a Google search on Alabama Bigfeet. Just so happens there's a couple of articles written up in the Alabama Game and Fish magazine around the same years that this encounter happened to me. After reading these articles, these people claimed to see a creature, one headshot at it several times trying to get to his truck. And also, one described the popping of the jaws, the same as I had heard. Now, after 10 years of studying and watching and listening to everything I can find out about a Sasquatch, I'm positive this was one that was messing with me. Brings a whole new meaning to messing with Sasquatch, as in the commercial. Sasquatch was messing with me. I continue to deer hunt, but never go without at least 4 or 5 flashlights and plenty of firepower. I've been known to be the first one of the truck on most hunts. Admit it. I not visually see anything, but again, with all the internet research, I cannot believe it could have been anything else. I have not and did not return to that club ever again, and my friend's father later on got out of the club also. I very rarely tell this story to anyone, but have on occasion, and people that know me believe something really strange went on, and some opened up to their own stories. I can say that ever since that day, it has changed the way I hunt forever. Sorry for such a long story and not having a visualization. I'm trying to put you in my shoes that evening. I will say during my research, I did hear a few recordings that sounded very close to the talking of the two things I heard. I did say they were communicating with each other. I thought it was a mix of Asian and Native American languages. Thanks for reading this, what I call my encounter. I know something is out there and is being covered up by unknown people. Have a good day and thanks again. My name is Joel Posey, and using my name is fine. It'll compel others to tell their stories. Wow, Joel, I really appreciate that, man. And I've spent a lot of time in Alabama, hunting in Alabama, both springtime and that late fall that you guys hunt. And I'll tell you one little story when I was down there in Greene County, all right? Yeah, we were on my friend's big hunting property, lots of swamp, food plots, etc., big timber. And they had hired a trapper to come down and start cleaning out some of the raccoons after they purchased this tangled up swampy place to get rid of a bunch of raccoons and thin out the beavers and start enhancing the turkey. And it's funny, the second we pulled up to check up on him, he gets out of the truck and he knew exactly who I was. He'd been following me on YouTube for quite some time with all my wolf trapping knowledge I was sharing and stuff. We started BSing, and it turns out that same trapper had footprints cast and a huge bag of the largest turd he ever seen in his life, and he bagged it and kept it. And yeah, I think he said it was 17.5-inch footprints that he found trackway across a farm field, and I believe he said it was north central Alabama too. So there you go. That's what I can add in to what I've heard firsthand from somebody in Alabama. I'll tell you what, another time I'll tell you a story on that same theme as you just shared about waiting for your friends. So we're out there, what were we doing? I was deer hunting. And this is a big property, right? Winding roads all over the place, old dirt roads going all through the back 500. I think it's 1,500 acres they have total or something like that. But anyway, they dropped me out by myself in a tree stand. I'm going to sit there for whitetail, and then everybody takes off, dropping everybody off. Wherever they went, I haven't a clue. And then I don't think I had cell service there either. So dark finally comes. I'm sitting there in this tree listening to the creepy, eerie swamp sound down there that if you're not used to it and you go down there and listen to it, it is something else, especially when you're by yourself in the pitch black. No moon. There might have been cloud cover because it was dark, so dark. But I remember I was kind of walking up the dirt road. I could just see it, and all of a sudden, I could hear the hogs fighting in the swamp, like right beside me, maybe jumping about 20 feet in the air. And I'm waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting for my friends to come. And now I'm to the point I don't even know I don't have a clue how to walk out of there. I don't know which way to go. Haven't a clue. It's either that way or that way, and either way I know I'm deep in the middle of it, right? So I'm like, okay, whatever. And we always clown around with each other non-stop. So I figure they're trying to spook me out on purpose. They're trying to leave me there to spook me out intentionally, right? So I'm like, okay, let's get it on. I'll lay here all night long. I don't give a shit. So I curled up in the grass on the side of the road, and I just lay there, waiting. Now I'm not going to try walking out because I don't know where I am. Rule number 1, you stay put, right? You stay exactly where somebody knew you were at last, and you don't move from that spot. So that's what I was doing. But holy cow, that seemed like a long time, man. Laying there in that grass, your senses are on fire, listening to that swamp sound and hoping a herd of hogs isn't going to come down the road and a big boar hog's going to rip into you or something. But it's pretty funny because all of a sudden then I could finally hear the slight sound of something coming, and then a little bit of a glow in the treetops. And because we had those electric bad boys, those dead silent electric 4-wheel drive buggies, and they had a light bar on the front of it, and they're coming up the trail. And then I could finally see some thicker grass right up ahead, so I ran up there. And I got in the grass like this, and I waited and I waited and I waited. And when they were right in front of me, I dove out right in front of the electric bad boy and scared the shit out of them, right? Never forget that one. That was pretty funny. But anyway, yeah, there is a lot of Sasquatch sightings in the state of Alabama. Every state in the South, every state in the U.S., every province of Canada. It's just is what it is, right? But anyway, I think I got time for one more, and I gotta get out of here. Silver Skagit Road, Hope, BC. All right. Hello there, Steve. My name is Curtis. A while back, now a quality friend of mine showed me one of your videos and got me hooked on your channel. At this point in time, I'd say I learned more valuable knowledge from some of the stories you read than I do watching the evening news, which is a shame. Yeah, which is expected, actually. If everybody knows by now, the news should just be kicked to the curb, and the people need to talk with each other, and that's all we need. And that is a fact. One day this may change, and we'll all be better for it. Until that time, the vast majority will continue to blindly walk through life. I'm 33 years old and live in the South Delta area of Vancouver. I'm an avid outdoorsman. I like to spend my downtime fishing, tracking, and solo hiking. Multiple days of solitude in the woods is something I enjoy. I've had one encounter that I know of, but since watching your channel, I've been left wondering if some of the strange and uneasy feelings I have felt when out alone in the woods are Sasquatch related or just my awareness of predators in the area. Either way, it is interesting, and I intend to take note of these occasions from now on. Our experience happened 9 years ago in mid-spring near Hope, BC, on the Silver Skagit Road, south a ways of the Eaton Lake Trail entrance. My girlfriend at the time and I decided we would take her sister and new boyfriend out camping for the weekend, neither of which were very outdoorsy. I figured it's a good place for them to start. Right in Sasquatch Central. The girls were intent on making sure they had perfect makeup all weekend and killed the battery in the truck on the second night. I noticed this around 11 p.m. and knew there was not many other campers in our area at the time, but remembered that just north of us a ways, there was a couple van camping off to the side of the main road. Myself and the other guy decided we would walk back to the van campers and asked if they could lend us a hand jump-starting the battery in the morning before they headed home. The girls thought this was a risky thing to do in the middle of the night and insisted we take the new 22 cal rifle I brought, as I had just got my firearms license. While we were gone, the girls would stay in the truck. We walked a few kilometers up the road. It was a dark and quiet night. We talked like two guys that had known each other for years as we walked. It was very comfortable. All of a sudden I got this weird feeling. It wasn't fear, but I'll call it anxiety, and I feel we both felt it as we both stopped talking and focused on our walk. All of a sudden we heard a sound I'll never forget, and when I hear similar sounds, my hair will stand on end and my heart rate picks up. It sounded like a very large man yelling from deep in his guts and finishing it off with an almost deep screaming cry, if that makes any sense. Almost like if you crossed Arnold Schwarzenegger's Predator call with a T-Rex noise. I know that's a lot to take in, but we feel this noise in our chest like standing on the front of a large subwoofer. Oh, that would suck. When we heard this noise, it was coming from the west side of the road. This portion of valley floor is narrow. I want to say 100 yards or less across this thing was close. There were steep mountains and thick brush to the east, then the road we were on, and a shallow ditch, bushes, then the river and Stone Mountain face to the west. We shined flashlights into the bushes. I had the little pea shooter pointed towards the ditch up the side of the road in the direction we heard the sound. We called out a couple times like you would to scare off a bear, and I fired a round into the ditch. After firing a round, the thing yelled at us again, so I fired again. We went back and forth doing this for about 5 rounds. Then I stopped, and I told the other guy I was with, I can't shoot anymore. We may need the rest. I knew at that time the 22 rounds weren't going to help us any more than the rocks on the ground would, but I kept that to myself. We stood there in silence for a few minutes and didn't hear a thing, so I said we should walk back. This was something big, and I had no explanation for what would make that sound, and worse yet, not being intimidated by gunfire. This thing actually made me feel like he or she was letting us know that we don't stand a chance. As you've said, we're outclassed. We made it back to the camp with no further encounters. We did not say much other than, that was crazy, and what the hell could that have been? When we got back to camp, the girls said they also heard a noise, and they had locked the truck doors, but nothing like we heard, nothing else happened. The next morning I walked out to the main road and waited for somebody to drive by, and eventually somebody did. After this experience, I told a few people, most of which glazed over and didn't hear half what I was saying, which is a very shitty feeling, so I stopped telling people and have kept it to myself. The quality friend I mentioned in the beginning was one of the people I told, and I think he wanted to believe me in the beginning, but had his questions. It wasn't until he had an experience of his own up in the Caribou region of BC at his remote property that he truly believed me. We've asked each other often, have you noticed anything in the woods? It's always a no, but I did see a bear or something along those lines. With some of the things we pick up from your channel, I think we might have more to talk about in the future regarding this topic. Thanks for sharing, Steve. It takes one hell of a man to do what you're doing, and we all appreciate it. You're welcome, man, and thank you for sharing your story. Obviously, I wouldn't be able to do shit unless all you guys shared, right? And that's what we're doing. We're sharing with everybody in the planet through this YouTube channel. That was a good volley. All right, let's see if I got time to do one more, because I got to get ripping. If I don't go quick, I'm going to miss that last light view of those slides across Duffy Lake to see if there's any grizzly bears. Oh, what do we got? Hopefully this is... How long is this one? That's a long one. All right, here we go. One more and then I'm out of here. Who knows what we're going to see in the dark on that frickin' highway. Hey Steve, my name is James Hancock, and feel free to use my name. I'm 54 years old now and couldn't care less what other people think. Good for you. I've written you before a couple times, but if you shared either of them, I missed it, which is okay. I'm trying again in hopes that I may be able to try to help someone by sharing what happened. I've been following you since you first started talking about Sasquatch. I appreciate what you're doing, and all the people that you're helping, myself included, as I am a fellow member of the Club of No Return. I felt compelled to share this in hopes that others who may have seen or experienced something similar might find some kind of peace or solidarity in knowing they are not alone. I hope after what I'm about to tell you, you don't decide that I'm delusional or dishonest. I have nothing to gain. That as I've been helped, I just hope I can help others. This is more about my mother's sighting than my own experiences, and I'll try and keep it short. There's some woods a few miles from the small town I live in that ever since we moved here when I was a child in the 70s, whenever we went down there was something wrong about the place. There was something off, a strange feeling, or sense the presence. Years later, I became an adult and avid hunter. I thought about hunting that area as it was closer and had a lot of game at times. Now, before I start hunting there, I asked my mother a question. Now, please bear with me as I explain how she raised me to believe in what you would call gut instinct, psychic ability, etc. How she told me that my grandfather would always ask her, during the period of her life when they were basically living as nomads, how she felt about going to the next town that he was thinking about, and if she felt good about it, they would go. And things worked out. And on that few times, well, my grandpa chose to ignore her feelings. If she had a bad feeling about going there, and they moved anyway, it was always a very bad experience. They couldn't find work or whatever. Now, I'd already seen one of these beings as a child. I'd already associated this place with them. So that's why I asked my mother how she felt about me going hunting down there. She told me she had a vision of something black with white teeth. And then if I went down there, it would kill me. So naturally I didn't go. Only asking again years later how she felt, and she said she didn't feel anything bad. I didn't have any more visions of that creature that meant me harm. And that she felt it was okay now. I'm talking about my mother's natural abilities because of what happened after she saw one when we were both in those woods but slightly separated. And she was able to see the car we had come in through the trees, and she saw it standing next to the car door looking at her back light by the setting sun. Oh, and looking at her back lighted by the setting sun, and close enough that she could see the reddish tint to its brown hair on his arms and peaked skull. To keep this short, I won't go into that sighting. It wasn't a pleasant experience, and instead skip to what happened the next day. I was living with my mother at this time. This was back in '97. My mother has since passed. The following day, later in the morning, my mother was alone in the kitchen washing dishes. When she turned around and looked behind her, I believe she said she felt like she was being watched. And she saw the same being walking away with his back to her, out of sight in the living room. Wow. She would call this a hallucination, but my mother was someone that could see spirits, and she learned much from my grandmother, who was Choctaw Indian. I never doubted what my mother said that she saw, because going back to my grandmother, I only met my grandmother one time, and it wasn't exactly a formal meeting, since she just walked out in front of me after coming out of the bedroom. I've been staying in at my aunt's after nearly dying in the hospital, and turned and looked at me and then walked into the next bedroom as I stood in the hallway, intimidated by this person whom I didn't know. I went in the kitchen and asked my mother who this person was, and she asked me to describe her. When I did, she just told me that my grandmother had come to visit, greatly upsetting my aunt, who was there at the table with her. So of course I believed my mother. If she said she saw something could possibly be there, especially afterwards when I learned more about astral projection, or whatever you want to call it. As I recall, and I apologize if I'm wrong, you don't put much credence in people who say they'd seen an apparition of a Sasquatch, but I hope you will share this anyway. For those that don't have a choice as whether or not to believe that such things are possible, as they have joined that particular branch of Club of No Return. So that those people who have had experiences like this can take away from this what they will, and I hope find some peace in knowing they're not alone. My mother did not believe, nor did I, that what she saw that morning washing dishes was there in the flesh. I do believe that it followed us home, and just as we entered his house, so it had entered ours. The only words I can think of to apply to what she saw was an astral projection. Whether that is some form of communication, like a telepathic hallucination, or something that is actually physically happening that is being seen, I cannot say. But the doors were shut, and it did need to open them to get in or out. So yeah, I'm going to go with spirit. I'm not saying they're spirits. I know they're flesh and blood, but fellow human beings with their comparatively weak natural abilities have claimed to be able to go into a trance-like state and leave their bodies behind. Anyway, I use voice transcription, so I hope I didn't miss too many typos where I proofread this. I appreciate what you're doing and the time and effort it takes to do it. I was very sorry to hear about Mr. Macaroni. It's the hardest thing I've endured in my life is losing my little dog named Sugar, that I'd formed a very special, very strong bond with during some very hard times. To me, it was losing a child because she was my child, my little girl. The fact she was a different species made no more difference than adopted children not being blood related to the parents. The bond is there. Also, I don't believe possessing or being a soul is a uniquely human trait. And you and Mr. Macaroni will be reunited. In fact, I doubt he's very far away from you right now. Test your gut. Take care, Steve. Sorry if I went kind of long. Oh, and by the way, I love where you live. That's a lot more impressive than Oklahoma. All right, man. That was a good chunk. And before I forget, when you said I may not agree with the possibilities of these beings doing some crazy stuff like disappearing or reappearing, well, no, that wasn't me. You got me mixed up with somebody else. There's been far too many witnesses sharing with us those facts of these things absolutely disappearing before their eyes at times, and as well as trackways coming to an abrupt stop in snow or whatever. And don't forget about Edgar. Eddie shared with us a very amazing, the nuclear physicist shared with us an amazing experience when he saw that thing jumping straight up and down and starting to get transparent up to its waist before it spun and glared at him like you wanted to kill him, and then all hell broke loose for him, unfortunately. I gotta touch base with Edgar here pretty quick too and see how he's doing. But anyway, thank you for sending that in. I think I see a mule deer right there. I'll spin the camera in a second and zoom in on it. Then I'm gonna walk up to the camera and show you what's over the bank. Then I'm gonna run to my truck and bolt. Take care out there, everybody. Be safe. It was a mule deer. I'm not a blind old fart yet. There we go. Well, let's go have a look over the bank and let me get out here after. There it is, the mighty Fraser River. There's somebody mining gold down there, I'm guessing. I guess that's a sluice box there and water, isn't it? Probably coming out of that drain up to the right. There's bighorn sheep footprints all over the dirt below me here. And that's the direction I am going. Along that chunk of road right there, and up and off and around the corner. Okay, here I go, you guys.